I covered payroll twice. Then my sister got the manager title, when the numbers finally added up. The check I wrote that April was for $11,400, and I can still see my own hand hovering over the signature line, the pen not quite touching the paper, because some part of me knew that once the ink went down there was no taking it back. It was almost 11 at night. The kitchen was dark except for the little light over the stove, the one David always left on for me. The refrigerator was humming that low, steady hum it made, the sound a house makes when everyone in it should be asleep. My coffee had gone cold an hour ago, and I kept drinking it anyway, cold and bitter, because holding the mug gave my hands something to do that wasn't signing. I sat there for 20 minutes. I want you to understand that. 20 full minutes at my own kitchen table, a grown woman staring at a rectangle of paper, telling myself the same sentence over and over. This is the last time. This is the last time. It wasn't the last time. It was the second time. And there would be a conversation about a fourth time before I finally understood the thing my family had decided about me a long time ago. The thing they never said to my face but said freely to each other. I thought that night that I was being a good daughter. That's what the story in my head told me. What I didn't know was that they already saw me clearly. Perfectly clearly. They just didn't see me the way I thought they did. They had a word for what I was. And about a year later I would find that word on a phone that wasn't mine, standing in my mother's kitchen with a roast in the oven, and it would take my whole life apart in about 90 seconds. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it started. I was the middle child, and in most families that means you learn early that being useful is the only reliable way to get anyone to look at you. My older brother Marcus was the charming one, the kind of man who could talk his way out of a speeding ticket and into a bank loan in the same afternoon. My younger sister Dana was the baby, the pretty one, the one my mother used to cup by the chin and call my little miracle because there'd been complications when she was born, and for a while they weren't sure she'd make it. And then there was me, right in the middle, the one nobody worried about. People say that like it's a compliment, the one we never have to worry about. It took me most of my life to understand it isn't a compliment at all. It means the one whose feelings we can put down and forget about, like a coat on a chair, because she'll still be there when we come back for her. Our parents ran a print and signage shop my father started in a strip mall in 1988. Banners, business cards, yard signs, vinyl lettering for the sides of contractors' trucks. My father, Ray, was a genius with his hands and completely hopeless with paperwork. My mother, Lorraine, was the reverse. She was sharp about money in a way that could take your breath away, and warm with almost everyone, and something cooler than warm with me. I noticed it as a child the way you notice weather. You don't question it. It's just the climate you live in. I started at the shop when I was 13. Not officially, not on any payroll, just after school and on Saturdays, sweeping curls of vinyl off the concrete floor, learning to feed the laminator without catching my sleeve in the rollers. Marcus was supposed to be the one learning the trade, because he was the son and my father assumed the shop would go to him someday. But Marcus was busy being 16 and then 17, and by 17 he'd gotten a girl pregnant and the whole family swung around that like a door on a hinge. Dana was too little to do more than sit in the office with her crayons. So it fell to me. And I learned. By the time I was 19, I could quote a job in my head while a customer was still describing it. I could clear a jam in the plotter, that big finicky machine that cut the vinyl, without calling anyone. I could take a man who'd stormed in red-faced about a banner that came out the wrong shade of blue, and, by the time he left, have him laughing and promising to bring me his next 3 orders. I was good at it. That's the hardest part to say out loud, even now, because if I was good at it, then I built something. And if I built something, then I had a claim to it. And if I had a claim to it, then what happened later wasn't just neglect. It was theft. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. There's a certain kind of child who grows up believing that love is a debt, and that you pay it down through service, and that if you just keep paying, one day the account will balance and they'll finally love you back the way you love them. I was that child, and my family was more than happy to let me keep believing it, because a child like that is very, very useful. I remember one Saturday, when I was 15. A dealership had ordered a full set of banners for a grand reopening, and it had to be done by Monday. My father's hands were cramping up, that early arthritis he refused to tell the doctor about, curling his fingers in the middle of a job. Marcus had promised to come in and hadn't shown, so it was just me and my dad in the back room, the big fluorescent tube overhead buzzing and flickering the way it always did, that faint electrical hum you stopped hearing after the first hour. We worked in silence for a while. Then he set down the squeegee, flexed his sore hand, and looked at me across the workbench. "You know," he said, "you're the one I never have to worry about." And God help me, I glowed. I stood there with adhesive on my fingertips and vinyl scraps stuck to my shoes, and I felt like he'd handed me a medal. I carried that sentence around for years like it was proof of something. It took me 2 decades to understand what he'd actually said. He wasn't praising me. He was assigning me. He was telling me my place. The one I never have to worry about is the one whose needs I get to ignore forever, because she has agreed, somewhere deep down, never to make them my problem. I didn't understand any of that at 15. At 15, I just wanted him to say it again. So the years went the way years go. Marcus got second chances, and money when a venture folded, and a car when his broke down, and rent covered, just this once, more times than anyone bothered to count. Dana got the big wedding and the help with the down payment and whatever makes you happy, sweetheart. And I got trust. That was my inheritance. Trust. Which I eventually figured out is just the polite family word for taken for granted. When my father's heart finally forced the issue, when he was 62 and the cardiologist told him no more 12-hour days or he wouldn't see 65, the question of who would actually run the shop became real for the first time. And if you were a stranger looking at our family from the outside, the answer would have been obvious. I did the quotes. I did the ordering. I did the scheduling and the customer relationships and more, the books, because my mother's eyes were going and the numbers gave her headaches. I was there 5 and 6 days a week. A stranger would have said, well, obviously she runs it. But nobody in my family was a stranger. They were all standing inside the same old story. And in that story, my father, semi-retired, which meant he came in 3 mornings a week to drink coffee from his chipped mug and tell customers the same stories he'd been telling for 30 years. My mother kept the title of owner, and I kept doing every single thing, except now with even less oversight of the money than before. That last part is the part that got me. I just didn't know it yet. The first time I covered payroll, I need to be fair about this, wasn't really a betrayal. Not yet. It was March, cold and gray, one of those months where everything goes wrong at once. A big commercial client filed for bankruptcy owing us close to $9,000, money we were never going to see. And in the same week the heat press died, the expensive one, and had to be replaced. Payroll was due Friday, and by Wednesday the business account was short by $6,000. My mother called me Thursday night. I was doing dishes when the phone lit up on the counter, buzzing against the tile. I dried my hands and picked it up, and I heard it in her voice before she said a single word about money. There's this shift she does, this thing where the warmth comes on a half-second too strong, too sweet, the way syrup pours slow before it pours fast. "Sweetheart," she said, "how are you? How's David?" "We're fine, Mom. Everything okay?" A little pause. The pause was always where I could have caught it, if I'd wanted to. "Well," she said, "I hate to even ask you this. I really do." Another pause. "But you're the only one who can help right now." I remember leaning against the counter, the phone warm against my ear, and I remember that already. Before she'd even said the number, I was nodding. Some yes in me was already lining up. She explained about the bankruptcy and the heat press, and how the timing was just cruel, and how payroll wouldn't clear on Friday. And then she said the thing that made it impossible. "It's the crew I'm worried about," she said. "You know Denise just had the baby, and Ramon's got the 2 kids. If that check doesn't hit their account Friday morning, honey, those are real people who don't make rent." Denise, Ramon, good people. People who ran the machines and swept the floors and showed up every day and had never once done anything but honest work, and none of it was their fault. A client going under wasn't their fault. Marcus's whatever wasn't their fault. I stood there in my kitchen, and I thought about Denise carrying that new baby around to the shop showing everyone, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't be the reason her rent bounced. "How much?" I asked. 6,000, my mother said, and then quickly, before I could breathe. "And it's a loan, honey, you understand. The second things turn around, it comes right back to you. The second we're stable." "Okay," I said. "Okay. I'll transfer it in the morning." "Oh, thank you." And here's the thing I remember most. The relief in her voice was so warm, so complete, that for a moment I felt like the most important person in the world. "Thank you, sweetheart. I don't know what this family would do without you. I really don't." I hung up, and I stood there feeling loved. That's the trap. I hung up feeling loved. I moved the 6,000 the next morning. I didn't ask for anything in writing. Why would I? We were family. Family doesn't do paperwork. Family just helps. The shop stabilized over that spring. The money did not come back. Not in March, not in April, not by summer. And when I finally worked up the nerve to mention it, gently, over Sunday dinner, my mother waved her fork in the air like she was shooing a fly. "Oh, honey, we're all in this together," she said. "It all comes back to the family in the end." And Marcus, who happened to be there that night, who to my knowledge had never covered a payroll in his entire life, leaned back in his chair and grinned. "Don't go keeping score, sis," he said. "That's not a good look." Everyone laughed, not cruelly, just easily, like he'd said something charming, and I felt my face go hot. That specific heat that climbs up your neck. And I looked down at my plate and I let it go. Because the only other option was making it a big thing. And I had been trained since before I could remember never, ever to make things a big thing. I told myself it was fine. I told myself it was one time. I didn't know I'd just taught them how it worked. The second time was that April, the $11,400. And this time it was not a fluke, and it was not bad luck, and there was no bankruptcy to blame. This time it was Marcus. Marcus had gotten it into his head that the shop needed a big new large format printer, the kind that could do full vehicle wraps and enormous banners in one pass. And he'd sat my parents down and painted this beautiful picture of all the business it would bring in. And my father, who loved Marcus the way you love the child who worries you, got excited, and they took out a line of credit against the shop to buy it. $60,000 of equipment, and when it arrived, wheeled in on a pallet jack, wrapped in plastic, everyone treated it like a newborn. Marcus got clapped on the back. Marcus had a real head for business after all. Except Marcus had done the thing Marcus always did. He'd fallen in love with the picture and hadn't checked the math. He hadn't accounted for the cost of the specialty inks, or the installation, or the training, or, most of all, the monthly payment on that line of credit, which came due whether or not the printer had earned a dime. And within 2 months that payment was quietly eating the shop alive from the inside, and once again, payroll came up short. Much shorter than 6,000 this time. The call came on a Wednesday evening, same voice, the sweet one. "Sweetheart." "Mom, I know this is a lot to ask. I know it." I could hear her choosing the words. But you have to understand, Marcus really did have the right idea with that printer. He did. It just needs a few months to ramp up, that's all. These things take time. I was standing in my kitchen again, in the same spot, and I remember watching David set down his book across the room and go still, listening. How much, Mom? It's a little bigger this time. A breath. 11,400. $11,400. I had that money. I want to be honest about that because it matters. I had it in a savings account. It was the down payment on a house David and I had been talking about for 3 years, the little place with the porch we kept driving past. That's what that money was. And the crew? She was saying, you know how it is, honey. They have to eat. Yeah, I said. Yeah, okay. You're an angel, she said. You are. You're the only one in this family with any sense about this stuff. I hung up. I stood there with the phone in my hand. Marcus really did have the right idea. That was the sentence circling in my head. Marcus had the idea. Marcus got the printer. Marcus got the pallet jack parade and the pat on the back and a real head for business. And I got the bill. I got to empty the house account quietly, in the dark, so that Marcus's idea could keep looking like a success and nobody would ever have to know it wasn't. I got the checkbook out, and I sat down at the table, and that's where you found me, at the start of the story. 20 minutes. Cold coffee. The refrigerator humming. David didn't say anything for a while. He just stood by the counter watching me. And when I finally signed it, when the pen finally touched down and I filled in the amount and tore the check out along the perforation, I said it out loud. To him, to myself, to nobody. This is the last time. David is a patient man. He'd watched all of this for the whole 8 years we'd been married. Watched it the way a person on the shore watches someone they love keep wading out into the same current. He didn't argue. He didn't lecture. He just looked at me gently. And he said one thing. You said that in March. It landed like a hand on a bruise. Not because it was cruel. Because it was exactly, precisely true. I got defensive. The way you do when someone touches the thing you've been working hard not to look at. They're my family, David. I know they are, he said quietly. And he let it go. Because he loved me and I wrote the check. I've had years to sit with the question of why I kept doing it. And the honest answer, the one that took me the longest to be able to say, is that I was afraid. Not of them. I was afraid of what would be left of me if I ever stopped being useful. Useful was the only room I'd ever been given in that family. If I stopped, I was afraid I'd simply disappear from their eyes completely. That there'd be nothing there where I used to be. That's an ugly thing to know about yourself. That you kept letting people take because you were more frightened of being nothing to them than of being used by them. But I promised I'd tell this true. So there it is. Now I have to tell you about the good part. Because there was a good part. And I need you to feel it. Because it's the height I fell from that makes the rest hurt the way it does. That summer, we landed the biggest job the shop had ever done. A regional grocery chain was opening 4 new stores, all at once, and they needed everything. Exterior channel letter signs, interior wayfinding, department banners, parking directionals, the whole package, 4 times over. It was the kind of contract that could put a small shop on the map, and it came to us for one reason. Me. 3 years earlier, a nervous guy named Tom had walked in needing a single yard sign for his daughter's birthday, and I'd made it perfect, and I'd asked about his daughter, and I'd remembered her name the next time he came in. Little jobs. Over years. And Tom had climbed the ladder at that grocery chain, and when they needed a signage vendor they could trust with a multi-store rollout. Tom said, I know exactly who to call. I ran that entire job. 6 weeks of it. Coordinating 4 install crews, staging print runs so the machines never sat idle, writing a specialty ink supplier who kept slipping his deadlines until I finally got him on the phone one morning and, very calmly, made it clear that if the material wasn't on my dock by Thursday, he could kiss the account goodbye. It was on my dock Wednesday. The day the last store cut its ribbon, I was standing in the back of the shop, and the big printer was running, that steady rhythmic chunk of the heads moving back and forth. And my phone rang. It was Tom. "I gotta tell you something," he said. "You there?" "I'm here, Tom. 20 years I've been doing facilities. 20 years. And I have never, not once, worked with a vendor as on top of it as you. You didn't drop a single ball. Not one. You made me look like a genius to my regional VP." He laughed. "I mean it. You made me look good. I'm not gonna forget that." I stood there with the printer chunking away behind me, and I felt something warm come up through my chest and prick at the back of my eyes, and I had to clear my throat before I could answer him. Because I couldn't remember the last time somebody had looked directly at the work I did and named it, out loud, to me. "That means a lot, Tom," I said. "That really means a lot." I went home that night lighter than I'd been in years. I told David the whole thing and he grinned and went to the cabinet and took down a bottle of wine we'd been saving for something. No particular something, just for when there was a something. And we sat out on the back step in the warm dark with our glasses, and I let myself believe, for one whole evening, that this was it. That this job, this big undeniable job, would finally be the thing that changed how my family saw me. That my father would look at what I'd pulled off and finally understand what he had in me. I really believe that. I want you to hold on to that. Remember the back step. Remember the wine. Because the very next Sunday, my father raised a glass at dinner, and I honestly thought, this is the moment. We were all around the table. The smell of my mother's pot roast was thick in the room, that Sunday smell, and the family photo wall was there behind Dana's head, the way it always was, crowded with school pictures and Marcus's wedding and Dana's wedding. My father tapped his knife against his glass and everyone quieted, and he lifted it. "I want to say something," he said. "To the grocery job. Biggest thing this shop has ever landed. In 35 years. Biggest ever." My heart came up into my throat. Here it is, I thought. Here it is. And my father smiled and he said, "And to Marcus, whose printer made the whole thing possible." For a second I didn't move. Marcus hadn't touched that job. He hadn't quoted it or coordinated it or saved it when the ink supplier tried to blow the deadline. He'd been in Cabo for 10 days of it, posting pictures of himself on a boat. But my father raised his glass to Marcus, and everyone turned toward Marcus, and Marcus did the thing I had watched him do our entire lives. He held up both hands, all humble, and shook his head. Come on now," he said. "Come on. It was a team effort. Everybody pitched in." Which sounds so gracious, until you notice that it was a team effort lets him accept the credit and look modest doing it, without ever once saying the words "she did it, I didn't." Everybody drank. Glasses came up all around the table, and I lifted mine too, because what else do you do? And I drank, and I set it back down, and I felt every bit of that warmth from the back step drain straight out of me and down onto my mother's good tablecloth. Nobody at that table noticed. That was the loneliest part. Nobody even noticed there was anything to notice. I told myself it was fine. I wish I could tell you it was the last time I'd raise a glass to somebody else being handed my work. It wasn't even close. That was the summer Dana started coming around the shop. It started casual. She'd swing by with the kids in the afternoon, take some photos on her phone, post them with little captions. She had a marketing degree from somewhere and a couple of years at ad agencies behind her, and since her second baby, she'd been between things, which in our family was a perfectly respectable place for Dana to be. It never would have been respectable for me, but it was for Dana. That fall, my mother made an announcement at Sunday dinner, brightly, like she was giving us all a gift. "Dana," she said, is going to come on board and help modernize the business. And I want to tell you something I'm not proud of. I was glad. I actually felt this little lift of hope. I thought help modernize meant help. It meant another set of hands. It meant that maybe, finally, I could take a breath, hand something off, not be the only one holding all of it. I had no idea I was sitting there feeling grateful about the arrival of the person who would be handed my whole life while I taught her how to hold it. Here's the thing about Dana, and it would honestly be easier if it weren't true. She wasn't lazy. She wasn't stupid. She was charming and genuinely talented at the parts of the business that were fun. She redesigned the logo, which no one had asked her to do, and it looked good, sharp, and modern. She set up an Instagram and grew it faster than I would have believed, and she'd sit next to my father at the front counter and scroll through it, showing him the follower count, and he'd light up like she was showing him a grandchild's report card. What Dana never did was learn to run the plotter. She never learned to quote a complicated multi-piece job, or read a profit and loss statement, or handle a vendor who was 3 days late with material you'd already promised a customer. The boring stuff. The stuff that was actually the business. And here's the small thing I started noticing that fall. The thing that sat in my stomach like a swallowed stone. A customer would come in glowing. "The new branding looks incredible," they'd say. And Dana would smile, warm and easy, and say, "Oh, thank you so much," and take it, and that was fair, because it was hers. But then the customer would say, "And the signs came out perfect. The quality, the turnaround, unbelievable." And Dana would tilt her head and say, "Right? We worked so hard on that." We. As though she had ever once stood in the back at 10 at night babysitting a print run to hit a deadline. As though she knew what it cost to make that turnaround happen. I don't think she was lying, exactly. I think that's what unsettled me most. I think she'd been around a few months, and she had simply absorbed the family's oldest, deepest rule without even realizing it. The rule that said the visible person is the one who did it. The person out front, in the photos, taking the compliments, and the person in the back, doing the boring stuff, is furniture. I told myself the division of labor made sense. She did the front, I did the operations. Real businesses have that. I shouldn't be small about credit. That's the thing about spending your whole life being the reliable one. You get so practiced at not keeping score that you'll talk yourself out of almost anything. But there was a voice in me now that hadn't been there before. And it was quiet, but it was clear. She doesn't actually know how any of this works, and they are already treating her like the future of this place. They never once treated you like the future of anything. I told the voice to hush, and for a while it did. Then came the winter I still cannot think about without my chest going tight. I got sick. It started as what I was sure was a bad flu. Aches, fever, that bone-deep tiredness. And I did what I always did. I went to work anyway. I stood behind the counter running a temperature, quoting jobs, because I was the reliable one, and the reliable one doesn't stay home. I pushed through it for 4 days. On the 4th night, David came home and found me on the bathroom floor, shaking, unable to string my words together right, my skin gray. He got me to the emergency room. Pneumonia, both lungs, and it had gone septic while I white-knuckled my way through 4 days of quoting banner jobs. They admitted me that night, and for about 36 hours it was genuinely frightening, more frightening than David let me see at the time. He told me later, months later, how scared he'd been. He didn't show me any of it while I was in that bed. I was in the hospital 6 days. And the thing I remember most clearly from those 6 days, clearer than the IV taped to the back of my hand, clearer than the constant soft beep of the monitor beside me, is my mother's visit. She came once, on the 2nd day. She was there about 40 minutes, and she spent most of it on her phone, thumbs moving, glancing up at me between whatever she was reading. I was too weak to hold much of a conversation anyway, so I just lay there, watching my own mother sit beside my hospital bed and text. And near the end, as she was gathering her purse to go, she paused. She looked almost apologetic, and I felt this flicker of hope, this childish flicker that maybe she was about to say something real. Maybe she'd say she'd been scared. Maybe she'd say, "I love you. Get better. We need you, not the shop we." "Sweetheart," she said, "I hate to even bring this up while you're lying here." That pause. Even flat on my back with a needle in my arm, I knew that pause. "But do you happen to know the password to the vendor account? Dana's trying to place the paper order and she can't get into the system." The monitor beeped. The IV dripped. I looked at her. I gave her the password. What else was I going to do? She wrote it in her phone, patted my leg through the thin hospital blanket, told me to rest, and left. Marcus didn't come at all. He sent a text with a little get well emoji, a cartoon face with a thermometer in its mouth. Dana came on the 4th day. She brought flowers, and I want to be fair to her. That was kind. She didn't have to. She sat with me for the better part of an hour, but she spent most of it telling me about a photo shoot she was planning, and about how absolutely overwhelmed she was trying to handle everything with me out, which was almost funny, lying there, because Dana handling everything meant Dana handling the Instagram, while my father and the crew ran themselves ragged, keeping the actual work alive. And then, near the end, she reached over and squeezed my hand and said, "I honestly don't know how you do all of it. I really don't." And for 1 second my heart lifted because I thought, she sees it. After all these months, she finally sees what I do. "You just have such a knack," she said, "for the boring stuff." The boring stuff. 25 years of my life. The boring stuff. She meant it as a compliment. That's what I couldn't get past, then or now. She wasn't being cruel. In her mind, she was praising me, and that was so much worse than cruelty. David came every single day, twice a day, morning before work and evening after. He brought me real food when I could finally eat, and he'd sit and hold the hand that didn't have the IV in it. And on the 4th night, after Dana left, I started to cry, and I was embarrassed about it, wiping at my face with the scratchy blanket. David waited until I was done. Then he said, very softly, "You almost died, and the only thing your mother asked you for was a password." "Don't," I said. "I'm not saying it to hurt you." He rubbed his thumb over my knuckles. "I'm saying it because you keep waiting for them to show up for you the way you show up for them. Every time. And I love you too much to watch you keep waiting for a train that is not coming." I got angry at him. Right there in the hospital bed, hooked to a monitor. I got angry because he was right, and there is almost nothing harder to forgive in the moment than someone being right about the exact thing that's breaking your heart. But I didn't forget it. I want you to remember that he said it, because I carried it with me, even while I was still angry. I went back to work too soon. Of course I did. The shop was falling behind, and my father sounded exhausted on the phone, and Dana was drowning in the parts she couldn't do. And I told myself they needed me, and I went back before my lungs were ready, and I fell right back into the role. The too tight shoe I'd worn so long I'd forgotten a foot could feel any other way, but something under the surface had shifted for good. After the password, I couldn't stop watching, and watching is a dangerous thing when you've spent your whole life carefully not looking directly at anything. That's when the small moments started. The ones I couldn't have explained to anyone at the time. The ones that, looking back, were the whole story, trying to warn me. There was a Sunday. I came into my parents' kitchen, and my mother and Dana were laughing about something, heads close together. And when I walked in, the laughing didn't stop. Exactly. It just changed. It softened and closed, the way a conversation folds itself up when the wrong person walks in. "What's funny?" I asked, smiling, ready to be let in on it. Dana glanced at my mother, then back at me. "Oh, nothing. You had to be there." I hadn't been there. That was the whole point, though I didn't understand it yet. There was a dinner where Marcus's phone lit up on the table beside his plate, buzzing against the wood. He glanced down at it, and something crossed his face. A little private smirk, and he turned the phone face down. And as he did it, he and my mother caught each other's eyes for just a second. Just a flick. The kind of look two people give each other to make sure a secret is still safe. It was gone before I could be sure I'd seen it. I told myself I'd imagined it. There was the evening I brought it up, casually, scraping the last of the mashed potatoes onto my plate. "You know, we really should sit down one of these days and put my role on paper. Formalize the pay situation." My father nodded, easy. "Sure, sure. Let's talk about that soon." And my mother said, fast, too fast, "Oh, let's not get into all that tonight." And there was a silence at the table. Maybe 3 seconds, but in those 3 seconds nobody looked at anybody. My father studied his plate, Dana studied her water glass, and then my father launched into a story about a customer from 1994 who'd wanted a banner in the wrong dimensions, a story I'd heard 100 times, and the moment closed over like water over a dropped stone. But I felt it. 3 seconds of the whole family finding somewhere else to look. And there was one more. Dana mentioned offhand a change to the shop's Saturday schedule, a real operational decision, the kind I always made. "Wait," I said. "When did we decide that?" She blinked at me. "Oh, we talked about it." "When? I wasn't there for that." "Well," she said, and gave a little shrug. "It came up." "It came up? Where? With whom?" There was a we in this family that made decisions about the business I ran, and that we did not seem to include me, even though I was always the one left to carry out whatever they'd decided. I didn't have a name for it yet. I only knew, deep in my body, that there was a room in this family I wasn't allowed into. I could hear the murmur of it through the wall. I just couldn't find the door. And that fall, the thing they'd been deciding in that room, the thing behind the closed laughter and the face-down phone and the 3-second silence, was about to walk out into the open. Because Dana was about to make a mistake. A small one. The kind of ordinary mistake that changes everything. It happened on an ordinary weeknight. That's how it always goes, isn't it? Not with thunder. On a Tuesday. We had a family group chat, the 5 of us. My parents and Marcus and Dana and me. Ordinary stuff. Who's bringing what to Thanksgiving? My mother forwarding articles she found interesting. A photo of Dana's kids in Halloween costumes. I had it muted half the time because it was noisy. That Tuesday night my phone buzzed on the arm of the couch. It was the family chat. Dana had posted a photo of a banner design, a proof for a client. Clearly proud of it, with the caption, "What do we think?" And then, 3 seconds later, another message from Dana, quick. "Oops, wrong chat. Sent it to the other thread, LOL." I read it twice. The other thread. I sat very still on my couch. David was reading in his chair across the room. The TV was on low, and I felt something cold move through my stomach. Slow, like a stone sinking through water, because I knew every single group chat I was in, all of them, and not one of them was the other thread. There was another one, another family chat. One that had a name, one that people posted proofs to and asked, "What do we think?" One that Dana used so often she'd reached for it by reflex. And I was not in it. And all at once, sitting on that couch, every small moment came back and clicked into place like tumblers in a lock. The laughter that folded up when I walked in, the face-down phone, the look between Marcus and my mother, the 3 seconds of nobody meeting my eyes, the "it" came up. It all came from the same place. The room I could hear through the wall. It had a name now. The other thread. I could have let it go. I want you to know I almost did. That's who I was. The woman who let things go, who chose peace over knowing, who kept the story in her head, where everyone loved her, as best they could. For a full day, I told myself it was nothing, a spillover chat about logistics, a place to plan a birthday surprise, none of my business. But I'd been watching for months by then, and the watching had finally worn all the way through the part of me that always looked away. 2 nights later, we were at my parents' for dinner. My mother had a roast in the oven and the whole house smelled of it, that heavy warm Sunday smell even though it was a Thursday. She'd left her phone on the kitchen counter, face up, next to the mail and a half-drunk cup of coffee, and she'd gone into the dining room to check on the table. And I was alone in the kitchen. I looked at the phone. I looked at the doorway. I could hear my father in the other room, and Dana's kids somewhere down the hall, and my mother's footsteps moving away. I picked up the phone. My hands were not steady. I want to be honest about that. My heart was going hard and high in my chest, up in my throat almost. The way it does right before you do something you can't undo. I knew her passcode. Everyone knew her passcode. It was Dana's birthday. It had always, my whole life, been Dana's birthday. And I remember even in that moment some small tired part of me noting that, of course it is. The screen unlocked. I opened her messages, and there they were, the chats, stacked in a list. Our family chat near the top, the one with all 5 of us, and below it, a few threads down, another one. It was called Family, just that, not Family 2, not something coded or hidden, just Family. A group named Family that had my mother in it, and my father, and Marcus, and Dana, and not me. As if the actual family were the 4 of them, and I was something else. An account. A vendor. A name that got added to the other chat when there was scheduling to hand off. I opened it. I could hear my mother's voice from the dining room, telling Dana's kids to wash their hands. I didn't have long. I knew I didn't have long. My thumb was shaking as I started to scroll, and I scrolled up, into the past, into all the days and weeks of my family talking to each other in a room I'd never been allowed into. Most of it, at first, was nothing. Grocery run coordination, a funny video, plans for a lunch I hadn't been invited to and hadn't known about. Each ordinary message was its own small cut, because every one of them was proof that they had a whole warm, easy life together that simply didn't have a chair in it for me. And then I got to April. There was a message from my mother, from that April, the month of the $11,400. And it was so casual. That's the thing. It was so light and offhand, tossed into the chat like a comment about the weather. Don't stress about the printer payments, she'd written. We'll just have her cover payroll again. She always does. She doesn't even ask about it after. I read it standing in the warm, roast-smelling kitchen, and I stopped being able to hear the house around me. She always does. She doesn't even ask about it after. And she was right. That was the thing that took the floor out from under me. She wasn't lying. She wasn't even being especially cruel. She was just describing me, accurately, coldly, to my own brother and sister, like reporting the reliable behavior of a machine. Reliable. Doesn't ask questions. Doesn't push back. And the little smiling face at the end, that was the part I couldn't breathe around. The little smile. Like it was a relief. Like I was a relief. I kept scrolling. I don't know why. You'd think you'd stop. You don't. You keep going the way your tongue keeps going back to a broken tooth. There was a message from Donna, more recent, laughing about something, and she'd quoted an older line, something Marcus must have said long ago, something the family clearly repeated to each other like an inside joke. Marcus's line was, "She's basically free labor. That's the whole point of her LOL." And Dana had quoted it back with 3 laughing emojis. That's the whole point of her. I stood there and I read those words. That's the whole point of her. And something in my chest, some long, tightly held thing, just quietly came apart. Not with a bang. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt like setting down something so heavy you'd forgotten you were carrying it, and realizing your arms don't know how to be empty. The whole point of me. 25 years. 13 years old. Sweeping vinyl. 15. Glowing at the workbench. 19. Calming down furious customers. The 6,000. The 11,400. The pneumonia. All of it. Reduced to a punchline that made my baby sister put 3 laughing faces on it. Free labor. That's the whole point of her. I made myself keep going because I could hear that there was more, recent, from the last week, and I needed to see it before my mother came back. And there it was. The newest thing. The thing that had made Dana slip and send that proof to the wrong chat. Because it was the chat where they were planning it. They were making Dana the manager. Not helping, not modernizing. Manager. Official title. New business cards. Her name on the door. Formal authority over the business I had built and run and rescued, handed to the person who couldn't have kept it open for a single week on her own. And there was my mother, laying out the plan. The way you'd plan around a difficult relative. "We'll tell her before we announce it," my mother had written. "She might be a little sensitive about it, you know how she gets. But honestly, she's happier just doing her thing. She's never been one for the spotlight. She's happier just doing her thing. She's never been one for the spotlight. As if I had chosen this. As if 25 years of doing everything and being named for nothing had been my preference. As if the invisibility they'd wrapped me in since I was 15 was a coat I'd asked for. I heard my mother's footsteps in the hall. I put the phone down. Face up, next to the mail, next to the coffee, exactly where it had been, angled the way she'd left it. I stepped back from the counter, and when she came into the kitchen humming, reaching for her oven mitts, I was standing by the window like I'd been looking out at the yard. "You okay, honey?" she said. "You look pale." "I'm fine," I said. My own voice sounded far away to me. Just tired. We ate. I sat in one of the cheap folding chairs my parents pulled out when there were too many of us for the real chairs, and I don't remember one word anyone said over that roast. I remember the photo wall behind Dana's head, crowded with everyone's milestones, and I remember looking at it and realizing there was not one single photograph of me on it after about the age of 15. After I'd started being useful. They'd stopped taking pictures of me. "You don't take pictures of the furniture." I drove home in silence. David asked what was wrong, and I couldn't get it into words yet, so I just said, "I found something." And he was quiet the rest of the way, because he loved me and he understood that there are things you have to carry a while before you can hand them to anyone else. We drove home with the radio off. I watched the streetlights slide by over the windshield, one after another, and inside me it was very, very quiet. Not the quiet of peace. The quiet of something ending that you hadn't even known was still alive, until it wasn't. If I told you I read those messages and became a strong woman with clean boundaries overnight, I'd be lying to you, and I promised I wouldn't. The first thing I felt wasn't anger. It was shame. Hot and deep and physical. I lay in bed that night with my face burning in the dark. Because they were right. That's what gutted me. She always does. She doesn't ask about it after. Free labor. They hadn't invented anything. They'd just described out loud to each other the exact shape I had folded myself into. I had made myself into that. I had volunteered. I had signed the checks with my own hand. For about 10 days I did what I'd always done with pain. I made excuses for them. Maybe my mother wrote that on a bad day. Maybe Marcus's line was years old and didn't mean anything now. Maybe the manager thing was really just a kindness for Dana, to give her purpose after the baby. Maybe I really was too sensitive. Maybe I really was keeping score. And then, slowly, the anger came. And it frightened me, because I'd never let myself feel it before. I'd lie awake at 2 in the morning with my heart slamming and whole speeches assembling themselves in my head. All the things I'd say, the way I'd stand up at the manager announcement and tell everyone the truth, the way I'd spread every bank record across my mother's table and make them look at what I'd carried. For an hour at a time, the anger felt like power. And then it would collapse back into the old fear, the oldest fear, the one that whispered, "If you do any of that, you will lose them completely. And then what will be left of you?" I finally told David everything, one night at our own kitchen table. The other thread, the password of it being Dana's birthday. She always does. Free labor, the manager plan. He listened to all of it without moving. And when I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm sorry, that's a terrible thing to find out." That was all. He didn't tell me what to do. He never did. But a while later, turning his coffee cup slowly on the table, he said one more thing, and it turned out to be the thing that freed me. "The manager title," he said, "doesn't actually change anything about what you do. Not one thing. The only real power they have over you is that you keep showing up to do the work. Every morning. That's not a lawsuit, honey. That's not a fight. It's just a decision you get to make. Every single morning." And that lodged in me and stayed. Because the whole time, in all my 2 a.m. of fantasies, I'd been imagining the big scene, the reveal, the speech. And the truth was so much smaller and quieter than any of that. They had no power over me except the power I put into their hands every day when I walked through that door and did the work they took the credit for. And I could simply stop putting it there. No speech required, no records on the table, nothing to prove to anyone. I just had to stop. The manager announcement came at Sunday dinner, of course, because everything in my family happened over my mother's roast. She brought out a little cake. She'd even had it decorated, "Congratulations," in blue icing. My father cleared his throat, tapped his glass, said they had some wonderful news, and announced that Dana was officially going to be the manager of the shop. Everyone clapped. Dana put her hand to her chest, and her eyes went shiny, and she said, "I'm just so honored. I promise I'll work so hard." And she said it with something I'd never seen on her before, a kind of settled confidence, easing into the title like a person sitting down in a chair she'd already privately decided was hers. My mother's eyes flicked to me, the careful look. The one I now recognized. The one from the chat. She might be a little sensitive about it, you know how she gets. She was watching to see how the sensitive one would take it. And I surprised every person at that table, including myself. I smiled, and I lifted my water glass and I said, "Congratulations, Dana. That's a big responsibility." And I meant it. In a way none of them could possibly have understood yet. It was a big responsibility. It was so much bigger than she had any idea, and as of that exact moment, I was no longer going to be the one carrying it for her. I didn't say another word about it. No speech. The speech was for my ego, and I'd spent my whole life feeding that particular hunger, and it had never once been fed back. So I let the cake get cut, and I ate my slice, and I went home. And over the following weeks, without an announcement, without a single dramatic scene, I quietly began to stop. I did it in stages, because I wasn't going to hurt the crew, Denise and Ramon and the others, people who'd never done a thing to me. About a week after the cake, I asked my parents if I could talk to them, just the 2 of them, and I sat down across from them at the same kitchen table where I'd read that phone. "With Dana taking over as manager," I said, keeping my voice level, "it makes sense for me to start stepping back. I'll spend the next couple of months transitioning everything to her, all my systems, the vendors, the books. And then I'm going to cut my hours and focus on building my own accounting practice." I didn't mention the chat. That knowledge was mine now, and I wasn't going to hand it to them to explain away, to reframe, to turn into me being sensitive again. I just laid it down, calm and kind. My mother's face did something complicated. This wasn't in her plan. In her version of events, I'd be quietly stung about the title, but I'd keep right on doing the work. Because I always did. She'd said so herself. "Well, honey," she said, "there's no need to be hasty. You don't have to go and do anything dramatic." And there it was. One more time. Me leaving was dramatic. Me being drained for 25 years was normal. "I'm not being dramatic, Mom," I said. "Dana's the manager now. Managers manage." My father had said nothing this whole time. He was sitting with his coffee, and he looked at me across the table. And I waited, because some worn-down hopeful part of me was still, even now, waiting for it. For, "We'll miss you." For, "Are you okay?" For, "Have we done something wrong, sweetheart?" He set down his cup, and what he said was, "Well, who's going to do the ordering? Not are you all right, not why, not anything about me at all. Who's going to do the ordering?" And it didn't even hurt the way you'd think. It landed almost softly, because it was so perfectly, completely honest. In that one question, my father told me the whole truth of what I'd been to him, more truthfully than any cruelty could have. I wasn't a daughter who was leaving. I was a function that needed reassigning. He wasn't losing me. He was losing the ordering. "Dana will," I said gently, "or you'll hire somebody. That's a management decision now." I stood up. I rinsed my coffee cup and set it in the rack. And I went home. The next 2 months were the strangest of my life. I kept my word. I sat with Dana, day after day, trying to hand her the actual machine of the business. I showed her the vendor spreadsheet, how each supplier had its own quirks, who to call, who to never trust with a rush job. I watched her eyes go flat and glassy within about 4 minutes. Every time. Because none of it was fun. None of it was Instagram. All of it was the boring stuff, and she had never in her life had to do the boring stuff. "So this vendor," I said one afternoon, pointing at the screen, "always tells you 3 days and means 5. So you order Monday for something you need Friday. You order it the Monday before." "Okay," Dana said, nodding, not writing anything down. 3 days later, she asked me the same question. I answered it again. She nodded again. And then there was the afternoon a supplier shorted us on a big order, and a client's grand opening was on the line, and I got on the phone and, in about 15 minutes, cool and hard, got it fixed, got the material rerouted, saved the job. And when I hung up, Dana was standing in the doorway of the office, and she'd heard the whole thing, and she had the strangest look on her face, a dawning look. The look of someone realizing that the prize they'd been handed was actually a weight, and that the sister they'd all laughed about had been quietly lifting it for years. "I didn't realize," she said quietly, almost to herself, "that you did all this." I looked at her for a second. There were 100 things I could have said, but there was nothing left to say that she'd have been able to hear a year earlier, and I didn't need her to hear it anymore. "You'll figure it out," I said. And I went back to the spreadsheet, and I stopped covering the shortfalls. That was the biggest thing I did, and I did it without a word, because there was no word to say. When the account got tight that spring, and I knew to the week that it would, because the printer payment hadn't gotten $1 smaller and Dana had no idea how to manage cash flow, my phone did not ring. That was the part that told me everything I still needed to know. Nobody called. Because it had never once occurred to any of them that the payroll clearing every Friday for years had been a thing I was making happen, quietly, with my own money, in the dark. They thought it was just how the world worked. They thought Friday came and the checks cleared the way they thought the sun came up. They never knew there was a person underneath it. There had always been a person underneath it. It didn't collapse dramatically. I need you to know that, because I know how these stories are supposed to go, with the great crash and everyone out on the street. That's not what happened. And I'm glad, because the crew didn't deserve a crash. It just got hard. Payments went late. My father had to have conversations with the bank he'd never had to have before. He dipped into his retirement, quietly. Marcus's line of credit, the printer, stopped being an invisible weight I absorbed and became a real, visible, monthly problem sitting on the family's chest. Ordinary consequences. Slow and financial. The way real consequences actually come. The business simply became exactly as hard to run as it had always truly been, the moment I stopped secretly paying to make it look easy. And Dana, 3 months into being the manager, quit. She didn't call it quitting, of course. She was allowed to leave with her dignity, the way I never would have been. She announced she was going to step back to focus on the kids, that the shop just isn't the right fit for me right now. And everyone accepted it, warmly, gracefully. Of course, sweetheart. Family comes first. I sat there and watched the family language wrap itself around Dana's exit like a soft blanket, the exact language that would never, ever have been offered to me. And I noticed it. And it was interesting to me how little it stung. A year earlier, it would have wrecked me. Now I just noticed it. The way you notice weather. Here's the thing nobody tells you about setting a boundary with your family. They don't beg you to come back. They don't sit you down and confess. They just get quieter and cooler, and they close ranks. And they build a new story in which you are the one who did the wrong thing. My mother told the women at her church that I'd gotten a little too big for the family business. Marcus told a cousin I'd always had a resentful streak, if you want to know the truth. After 25 years of covering for every one of them, a single act of walking away was all it took to recast me, at last, as the villain of the family. They'd never had a story about me before. Now they did. And it was the ungrateful daughter who abandoned everyone. And I let them tell it. That was the very last thing I had to learn, and it was the hardest of all. Because arguing with the story would have meant staying in the orbit, staying hooked into their version of me, spending more years trying to be seen correctly by people who had a financial reason to keep seeing me wrong. And I finally understood I was never going to win that fight. More than that, I understood I didn't need to win it. I knew what I'd done. The bank records knew. My own 2 hands knew. That turned out to be enough. I built the accounting practice. I'd had a handful of little clients on the side for years, squeezed into evenings, and now I had the hours and the energy to actually grow it. And it turned out that a couple of decades of running a real business had made me very, very good at helping other people run theirs. Within a year, I had more clients than I could take. Within 2, I hired my first employee, a young woman fresh out of school, and I taught her the boring stuff, and I made sure she knew her name went on her work. And the strangest, sweetest thing kept happening. Clients thanked me, directly, and they meant it. And when I did good work, my name was on it, right there. No one standing in front of me to take the compliment. Tom, the grocery chain man, became one of my very first real clients the month I went out on my own, and he sent me 3 referrals before that first Christmas. I hadn't understood, until it started happening, how much of me had been starving, not for money, but for the simple experience of my work being attached to my name. The shop is still open, in case you're wondering. My parents eventually sold a share of it to a younger man, good with his hands the way my father used to be, and he runs the day-to-day now, and they take a little income from it, and it's fine. Smaller than it was. The big printer got sold at a loss in the end. Marcus's line of credit got refinanced into something painful but survivable. Nobody was ruined. I never wanted anybody ruined. I only ever wanted to stop being the thing that kept them from ever having to feel the weight of their own choices. I see my family still. Holidays, birthdays, it's cordial. There's a distance now that everyone can feel and no one will name. My mother still now and then reaches for the sweet voice, and now I hear it coming from a mile off. Honey, I hate to even ask, but you're the only one who can. I'm sure you'll figure it out, Mom, I say, kindly. And I let the sentence sit there. And she does. She always could. That was the truth the whole time. They always could figure it out. They just never once had to because I was there. My father said something to me one time, about a year after I left. It was Thanksgiving, and I'd wandered into the kitchen to get away from the noise, and he was standing at the sink drying a dish with a towel, the same as he'd stood at that workbench 30 years before. The overhead light in that kitchen buzzed, faintly, the way the shop light used to. And out of nowhere, not looking at me, he said, "The shop was never the same after you left." And I stopped. Because for 1 second, one last time, that girl in me sat up and I thought, here it is. Here comes the thing I've waited my whole life for. He's going to say he sees me. He's going to say he was wrong. He set the dry plate in the cupboard, reached for another. And he said, "It's hard to find people who'll work like you did. Work like you did." Even then. Even reaching, in his own clumsy way, for something like tenderness. Even at the very end of it all, the most he could see of me was the labor, the work, what I produced. And I waited for the old ache. It came, just for a second, faint, an echo of an echo. And then, behind it, came something entirely new, something I'd never felt in that kitchen in my life. Because I understood, finally and completely, that his not being able to see me was never a failure of mine. It never had been. I had spent 30 years trying to earn a kind of sight from a man who simply did not have it to give. You cannot earn what a person does not possess. You can only, someday, stop asking them for it. So I picked up a dish towel and I dried the next plate, and I said, "Yeah, Dad, I worked really hard." And I let it be true. And I let it be enough that I was the one who knew it. We stood there a minute, the two of us, drying dishes under that buzzing light, and I thought about the 15-year-old at the workbench with adhesive on her fingertips, glowing because her daddy called her the one he never had to worry about. And I felt so tender toward her, and so relieved for her, because she had finally, 30 years later, put down the pen and stopped signing the checks. People ask me sometimes, the friends who know the whole story, whether I've forgiven them. And I've come to think that's the wrong question entirely. I don't spend much energy on forgiving or not forgiving. What I did was harder than forgiveness, and it cost me more. I accepted them. I accepted that my mother sees people in terms of what they can provide, that my father sees the whole world through the lens of who is doing the work, that Marcus will go to his grave a man with big ideas and no follow-through, and that Dana will always be the miracle who gets to step back for the kids. They're not monsters. That's the part it took me longest to sit with. They're just people who found a resource once, a long time ago, when she was a little girl sweeping vinyl off the floor, and they used it the way people use a resource, without much thought, right up until the resource stopped being available, and they had to notice, for the first time, that it had been a person all along. I still have the memory of that second thread. Family. The one I wasn't in. For a long time, it was the most painful thing I owned. It isn't anymore. And I'll tell you why. Because that chat told me the truth. And the truth, even when it's cold, even when it reduces you to a punchline with 3 laughing faces after it, is a gift compared to the lie I'd been living inside. The lie said, keep giving, keep covering, keep signing, and one day they'll love you the way you love them. The lie kept me trapped and hopeful and slowly emptying out for 25 years. The truth said, they never will. And you can stop now. And the truth set me free in about 90 seconds of scrolling, standing in a warm kitchen that smelled of roast. I don't cover payroll for anybody anymore. Isn't that something? I do payroll for a lot of businesses now, professionally, with an invoice attached and my name on the work. And every single time one runs and clears clean, I feel a small private satisfaction that has absolutely nothing to do with revenge. It's just the plain quiet pleasure of doing the thing I was always good at, in a life where doing it is seen and paid for, and mine. The last time I was at the shop just dropping something off, I noticed they'd finally put new photos up on the office wall. Dana's shots mostly, from before she left. Glossy pictures of the storefront, the equipment, the sign. And I stood there a while and looked, and there still was not one single photograph of me anywhere in the building I'd given half my life to. And I waited for the old wound to crack open. It didn't. Because I understood, standing there, that I didn't need to be on their wall. That was the whole thing, right there, the thing it took me a lifetime to learn. I'd spent so many years trying to get my picture hung in a family that had quietly decided I was furniture. And the freedom, the real freedom, was never going to be them finally hanging it. It was walking out of that building and driving home to a life where I already knew exactly who I was and didn't need anybody else's wall to tell me. I got in my car that afternoon, and I did not turn the radio off to sit in the silence, the way I had the night I found the thread. I turned it up, and I drove home in the ordinary golden light of an ordinary afternoon, to a house where a patient man was in the kitchen making dinner, a man who had seen the whole pattern years before I could bear to look at it, and who had never once, not for a single day, needed me to be useful in order to love me. And driving home, it came to me, plain and simple, that thing I'd been trying to buy from my family my whole life, with all that free labor, all those checks, all those Fridays. That thing you cannot buy from anyone. The thing that either exists between two people or it doesn't. I'd had it at home the entire time. I'd just been too busy covering somebody else's payroll to sit down at my own table and enjoy it. I make sure I enjoy it now, every ordinary evening of it. And that's the whole ending, really. There's no more than that. No courtroom, no great crash, no moment where everyone finally saw the truth and came begging me to come back. Just a woman who used to be the one nobody had to worry about, sitting at her own kitchen table, in her own quiet house, drinking coffee that is, for once, still warm. Because for the first time in her life, she is drinking it while she can. I never did get that $11,400 back, or the $6,000 before it. And you know what? I stopped waiting for it a long time ago. The very same way I stopped waiting for my picture on the wall, and for the mother who might call just to hear how I was, and for the family chat with my name in it. I let all of it go. Not because it stopped mattering, but because I finally understood the trade I'd been making all those years without ever knowing I was making it. I'd been paying them over and over to let me keep believing I belonged. And the day I finally stopped paying was the day I found out I'd belonged to myself the entire time. That turned out to be worth a great deal more than $11,400. It turned out to be worth everything.